Wholesome You hair preservationist Tasha Cruz. I'm your hairstylist, cosmetologist, and hair preservationist. Basically, I want to help you preserve the hair that's on your head. So today we'll talk about a hairy situation. All right, so the last time we were talking, we talked about how we nourish your hair from within, and that the most important thing about your hair is really your scalp or your skin, which is actually the largest organ on your body. So with that being said, today we're going to talk about the hairy situations that we get ourselves into that could possibly cause us issues with our hair. Eating the right things, not eating chips, not eating a lot of sugar, cakes, pies, cookies, things like that, so that we can enable all of the good stuff from your oranges, your bananas, your broccoli, your salmon, things like that, that will nourish your bloodstream, your hair papilla, so that we can continue to encourage your hair to grow. So the hairy situation today is, let's talk about how we just self-sabotage our hair's growth and our hair's longevity. So now the hair itself, the hair shaft, what you see here, we'll always point to that so that you can remember that that is the hair shaft. Sometimes guess what? We lose it. So a lot of times when we're losing hair, we have to sometimes take a step back and wonder, what are we doing on the inside? Did I drink enough water today so that I can circulate my blood and keep all of those nutrients reaching my hair papilla or my hair bulb to encourage hair growth? But the craziest thing about that is that the hair is not always growing. Did you know that? So the hair is usually going through cycles. As our life goes through cycles, our hair goes through cycles, right? So we'll just talk about the 3 different cycles of hair, which is the anagen stage, which means in this stage, your hair is actively growing. And then we have the catagen stage, which is sometimes the transitional stage, okay? So then from there, we have the telogen stage, which is our resting period. Now at this period, sometimes, I don't know why they just say resting, is actually sometimes just shedding so they can get ready to be active again, go back to the anagen stage. So a lot of times we can prohibit those cycles from taking place. So a lot of times you really want your hair to be in an active state. Now, as we said before, the hair shaft is really connected to the most important part, which is that scalp. So how are we keeping that hair growing? How? All right, so we've talked about the things that we can place within our bodies. So let's talk about how we take care of what's on the outside, what you see flowing, or what you see in different textures, straight, wavy, curly, or kinky. Let's talk about that. So you can have healthy hair from within, all right? But the main thing about the hair is that it is made up of protein, which again starts from within. If you're eating your proteins, which means that you're strengthening your hair. Now the hair is usually comprised of about 18 different amino acids, okay? So one of the biggest amino acids, or the most concentrated amino acid, is the cysteine amino acid. So a lot of times when we are lacking protein in our bodies, and again, that comes from your diet. Now, some of us love to have a vegetarian diet. Some of us have a high meat intake diet. But whether we're getting the protein from meat or vegetables, we have to make sure we're getting enough, because if we do not get enough, then this right here is going to be very, very weak, all right? So once it's grown out from our scalp, from our epidermis, and we can now see it on the outer part, then we want to know, what can we do to keep it? Okay, so that's what I am here for, your hair preservationist. I basically want to help you keep the hairs on your head. And again, we said that you already have the follicles that you're going to have forever and ever. Now, again, you can always, at some point in time, have multiple strands if that's how your hair decides to grow, multiple strands in a hair follicle, but you're only going to get a certain amount of hair follicles throughout your life. So once your hair grows out in this anagen or this active stage, what do we do with it? Okay, so what we want to do with it is keep it moisturized, okay? And how do we do that? And we go back again to the foundation. As your hair is growing out, there are sebaceous glands that are connected to your hair follicle, all right? And so in these glands, there is oil. But some people have very shiny hair before they really even put product on their hair, which means that their hair is actually pretty healthy sometimes. If the hair does not have a dull texture, then the hair is probably really nourished from within, and those sebaceous glands are actively working and they're not overactive, meaning that the hair is receiving the oil and making the hair supple so they can be more manageable once it reaches outside of the epidermis, all right? So if we want to maintain the hair that's on the outside, we have to refrain from a lot of things. So we're getting into a hairy situation because a lot of times we are self-sabotaging our hair's growth and our hair's ability to maintain a manageable state. Depending on your hair's texture, how you comb your hair is going to be very important. And whatever you use to comb your hair or brush your hair is going to be very important. So let's say if you have very kinky hair, all right, you want to use a wide tooth comb because your hair is sometimes getting too coiled, okay? It's too coiled or it's linking with another hair strand. And of course, no two hair strands are alike. And your hair, again, has several different textures sometimes, all right? But if you have very kinky hair, then really you want to consider the type of combs and brushes that you use. You want to use a wide tooth comb or a bristle or a brush that contains the little balls on the ends of it, so that you're making sure that you are not, number one, scratching your scalp. So once you get an itch, what do? I bet you thought you would need to scratch, right? Scratch with those nails. No, that is not what you do. That is not what you do, because what happens is when you're scratching your hair, sometimes you're causing abrasions in your scalp. So let's think about if, for instance, you scratched yourself. Have you ever scratched yourself or has someone scratched you before? All right. So if you've scratched yourself and you've cut into your epidermis, your dermis, or if you've gotten any deeper into your subcutaneous area, then you have caused some serious damage to your hair papilla, possibly. All right. So once you cause damage in that area, sometimes hair does not grow back. So guess what? You're self-sabotaging, which means you have just now caused a cut into your scalp. And in that area where there once was a living follicle, you have now just kind of said, no, we don't want hair to grow here. So what you could do in place of scratching your hair is take your fingertips, the balls of your fingers, and just rub vigorously, all right? Rub vigorously, and then even still, you don't want to rub too much because it's overstimulating and pulling or traction within the hair. But you want to make sure you're using your tips, and sometimes you can get a good workout with your tips. You know, you can kind of soothe that itch and make sure that you're not damaging your scalp. So another way that we typically get into a hairy situation is how we wear our hair. So ladies who love to just throw your hair back in a ponytail because you do not feel like doing anything with your hair, this is for you, especially you. So you're basically pulling your hair back out of free flow. And what's normally happening is subtraction, which means the pulling of your hair from its natural flow. And so once you're pulling, you're actually saying to the hair bulb, let's loosen up a little bit. Have you ever experienced a time where you have pulled your hair back and at the end of the day, you pull your hair barrette off, and it's usually going to be a stretchy material, right? Or rubber band of some sort. And you look into the rubber band and you say, oh, there's hair there. So what you have possibly done is pulled your hair out of the follicle. You've basically pulled that strand right out of there. And so basically you have become your own problem. So we've gotten into a hairy situation there, right? And then also, as we try to maintain our hair shaft, and we want to think of ways that we think will make our hair presentable for ourselves, for our workplace, for that party, for that that celebration or whatever. When we try to style our hair, we're sometimes still doing damage to it, all right? So let's talk about the texture, okay? So sometimes if you have a kinky texture, or if you have a straight texture, right? So say for instance, if you have a straight texture and you want to add some curl to it, well, what do we do to add some curl to straight hair? Sometimes we put a chemical in it, all right? Sometimes we will put a flat iron to it, correct? So when we do that, we are sometimes damaging our hair shaft. And how do we do that? Okay, so number one, when we're thermal curling our hair, if it's straight, or if we are straightening our hair and it's kinky, we're adding heat. Now, that is the biggest hairiest situation that we are getting into, because we are basically breaking the hair's hydrogen bonds down. So once we break the hair, we are basically telling it to try a different texture. We want you to become a different texture. We want you to either become straight or we want you to become curly. So when we're doing that, we are sometimes damaging our hair or overheating our hair. So what I like to offer you as a suggestion is making sure, if you want a curly look or a thermal curly look, that you adjust the temperature on your flat iron. And guess what? We are so known for what? Putting our hair on high heat to get a nice straight look, or as we have, a curly look. And we're putting a lot of heat or excessive heat on our hair that's actually causing our hair to change textures and then becoming weak. All right. So when we're doing that, we want to make sure that we have proper products that will allow us to kind of create a barrier for the heat in our hair texture. And we want to make sure that we are turning our curling irons or our thermal irons down to a lower temperature. I prefer starting the hair off with maybe a 300 temperature and seeing how far we can go. But I really like to stay away from the 400 temperature, depending on the texture of hair. Now, some hair is very strong and it can snap back. And I know we've talked about elasticity. So some hair has the ability to be flat iron on close to 400 heat, and guess what? Go right back to curly once we have added some water or moisture to the hair, and it's able to just pop back and it's not really damaged. And the elasticity is good. It's not going to break once we pull it, and it's just going to return to its natural state. However, I always like to caution everyone with using heat. If you start with a kinky, curly pattern of hair, then you may want to consider, before you touch that flat iron, what type of hairstyles you want in the future, so that we're not getting ourselves into a hairy situation. And that's going to conclude our segment for today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us.